On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, we speak to Deacon Chris Roberts, the chairman of the board of Martin Saints Classical High School at Chesterton Academy outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization here, joined as always by my wonderful colleague and co-host Grettelyn. Hi, Grettelyn.
Hi there, Joe.
And we are thrilled to have my neighbor here in the Philadelphia area and the chairman of the board of one of our Chesterton High School programs here locally, Deacon Chris Roberts. Deacon, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Joe and Grettelyn, it's really fun to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I know you got to see a little bit of what the Chesterton Society is about when we had our conference here over the summer. And of course, being a member of the Chesterton Schools Network, you know, kind of that side of our mission and what we're doing with the growth of these schools. But we relish these opportunities to get, you know, members of school faculty or headmasters, and in your case, a chairman of one of these schools on the podcast to help our listeners and our viewers understand just what it is, why classical, why this option. So maybe, I know you're one of the co-founders, just speak to, you know, that question. Why did you get into this?
Well, why did I get into this? I think, like a lot of Chesterton School founders, there was a personal side. You know, my co-founder, Adam Dickerson, who's now the headmaster, around about 2016, when we first started talking, we both had middle school age children, and we were looking down the pike at local high school options. And, you know, we just weren't inspired. But meantime, there was something else happening for both Adam and me vocationally. Adam was a canon lawyer at the Archdiocesan Marriage Tribunal downtown. And I had originally, my wife Hannah and I, we moved to Philadelphia so that I could teach at Villanova. And Adam at the Marriage Tribunal and me at Villanova, we were having converging experiences. Adam was working with couples in their mid-30s who, despite being Catholic educated pre-K to BA, had gotten themselves in these really tragic, messy families, you know, situations that led them to the annulment tribunal. Meanwhile, I was teaching at Villanova, where I had wonderful, bright students with big hearts. But, you know, even though they came from the theoretically, you know, best of the best Catholic high schools all up and down the Atlantic, sadly, they didn't really know their faith. They knew the Catholic punchlines. They knew that we were against X, Y, or Z. But you can't live a Catholic life when all you have are the thou shalt nots, right? Nobody in this day and age living in a college dormitory is going to live a Catholic life if they don't find the reasons and the rationale and the story behind our teachings, if they don't find those things beautiful and persuasive and credible. So Adam in the Marriage Tribunal, me on a college campus, and we're both feeling like Catholic educators, we've got to raise our game because, you know, business as usual in the church. I mean, you didn't have to have like Adam and I, where we were, we had privileged seats, but you'd have to be a stone not to notice that the church is hemorrhaging young people and business as usual is not bearing the fruit that it needs to. So, you know, we are not geniuses or saints. We don't have all the answers, but we felt like we wanted to do something to raise the game for Catholic education, do a little bit better. And we felt like in an archdiocese as big as Philadelphia, there was room for a classical high school on the menu. And we went on a road trip and we visited schools in different cities that we admired and had heard about that were a little bit further along. And we got out to Minneapolis, and we obviously knew of the Chesterton Society, and we had lunch with Dale Alquist and Emily de Rothstein, and they were like, yeah, we've got this thing. It's just kind of starting out. This is 2016. It's like we're going to have this network of schools, and we're all going to support each other, and we're going to get together and talk about what it's like to run a school and trade tips and tricks and curriculum and hold each other accountable for excellence and orthodoxy. And we thought that sounded like a good idea. So I think we were like the 8th or 9th school to sign up.
Nice.
And 8 years later, here we are.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's great. So what was it like starting up a Chesterton Academy?
I want to say one more thing about this sort of founding mission, because I don't want to sound like it was not a purely reactionary, not a purely negative thing. It wasn't just because, our experience in the mainstream Catholic system was not satisfactory. That was part of it. But Dale Alquist, I know I heard him say this. He swears I said it, but so we have a little fight about it. But yeah. I heard him say once, the bad news is that we have a crisis. The good news is that the solution to the crisis is to do what we always should have been doing anyway, which is run towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. So look, Martin Saints exists because we are trying to solve a problem, right? You don't found a school, a new school, if everything is just great and you don't need anything new. So you are responding to a problem. You are trying to solve a problem. But daily life at school, the vibe for the students, it's playing offense. It's running towards the good, true, and beautiful. It's actually an incredibly happy, joyful day-to-day existence. So I don't want to overemphasize that problem. Now, I apologize. That was me correcting my last. What did you just ask?
I love it. That's a beautiful caveat. I was just wondering, what was it like to get that process started, to kind of start along that road?
Okay. Well, again, thank God for the network, because, how do you go from having a cup of coffee with your friend after church, starting a school is a great idea, to actually doing it. And you need people who have blazed the trail. So, that first year and a half, we had weekly board meetings, because your to-do list, your chore list, it's long. You're dealing with the state, you're dealing with landlords, you're dealing with insurance, you're hiring faculty, you're plotting out curriculum. And here's where, thank you, 1,000 thank yous to the Chesterton Network, because, they've got checklists and flowcharts of the kind of things you have to pay attention to. So the sort of step-by-step, this is how you, deal with a licensing agent, or this is how you implement a curriculum, or this is how you place that first book order, blah, blah. So you need, the Chesterton Network kind of gives you that infrastructure, that you need for planning and pulling it off. But it's hard work. So if anyone out there is thinking of doing it, I say it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's the best thing I've ever done. It's you need to have an eye on the practical details, but also, constant prayer and heart for the mission to sustain it all in the right spirit.
Beautiful.
Well, if I may ask about, the name of your school probably strikes a lot of people. I know some people even around here will mix it up and call it St. Martin's, right? And as though maybe you're just using some kind of affectation, Martin Saint or something. But no, you're talking about a family of saints, the Martins. Maybe just share that with our listeners.
Thank you for being sensitive to that. Yeah, a lot of people want to call us St. Martin's, but we're actually called Martin Saints Classical High School, a Chesterton Academy. So Thérèse of Lisieux, the Little Flower, obviously one of the most popular saints of the last 100 years. Her birth name, her family name, her surname was Martin. So in American English, the Little Flower is Teresa Martin. And her parents, Louis and Zélie, they were canonized a little less than 10 years ago, I think just prior to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. So when we were starting off Martin Saints, the papal visit, he had just been here in Philly. I'd been a little bit involved in working on that, and the vibe was in the air. And Adam, my co-founder, he had a real spirituality for the Martin family. So we're named for the entire family of saints, Louis and Thérèse, Louis and Zélie, the parents, Thérèse, the daughter, of the very rare family canonized together, not as martyrs, but for the way that they lived. Louis and Zélie canonized for the way that they lived their marriage. So by claiming a whole family of saints as our patrons and our namesake, the Martin family of saints, we're trying to say to parents, you are the first and primary educators of your children, and our job as a school is to cooperate with you in the raising of your children, and to be on the other end of the partnership, a school that you can trust with a Catholic culture that is seamless and coherent with your family's home culture. So we'd already started publicizing ourselves as Martin Saints when we joined the Chesterton network. It's probably why we're not Chesterton Academy of Philadelphia or something. But the second half of our name, Martin Saints, a classical high school, a Chesterton Academy. That Chesterton aspect is always in the forefront too, because I like to say, while the Martin family, that's about cooperating with families, the Chestertonian spirituality, the biggest way it makes its imprint on us is Chesterton is obviously brilliant and witty, prophetic and hilarious at skewering the pretensions of modern culture and just, exposing the gaps and the foibles of modern culture. But he always does it with joy and without fear. And one of the raps, if you go out somewhere, some dark precinct of the internet, and you read the criticisms of classical education, they think that we're quasi Amish people pulling up the drawbridge, and that we're quivering in fear and right-wing conspiracy. And Chesterton is the antidote, the vaccination against all that, because Chesterton, when you ally with him, you're going to have a good time. You're going to do it in a spirit of friendship and joy. You're not going to fall for modern lies. You're going to see through them, but not in the spirit of fear and drawbridge. Chesterton, so that, these two pillars, the Martin family, kind of that family, whole household, domestic church vibe, and then Chesterton with his distinctive and wonderful attitude towards modernity.
That's a beautiful combo. I love that because, you're so right. Chesterton and his wife were all about hospitality, and they were very outward facing in the most charitable way. And, in some ways you think of the Martin family and they had all the daughters who went to the convent, and you think, oh, they're secluded. They're, in some ways they did pull up the drawbridge in a way that we respect and appreciate. But yeah, very, very beautiful.
You got to play offense and defense, and there's a time for both.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love it.
Well, they're both paradoxical figures too. Well, I'm thinking of Therese, not so much of the parents, Louis and Zélie, but Therese, who in the convent, she had this heart for the missions and for martyrdom, and famously dresses up as Saint Joan of Arc in a play, but lives a cloistered life of prayer, and then just Chesterton's sort of spiritual life of paradox, in that he so much had a heart for children and for family and for the defense of the family, and yet he and Francis were unable to conceive, and so had to kind of bear fruit in that way. So in a similar way that Therese accomplishes her sort of mission of martyrdom and a white martyrdom and of missionary work sort of vicariously, and by becoming ultimately a doctor of the church, Chesterton has this spiritual fruitfulness, and sometimes people don't know, and of course in the circles we travel in, sometimes that immediately becomes a cause for suspicion, like, why Chesterton and his wife are always just pictured holding a dog. Are they the kind of people Pope Francis is warning us about? But well, the dog's not in a baby carriage, first of all, and second of all, no, they couldn't have children, but if you want to see their children, look to the Chesterton Society, look to the Chesterton Schools Network. So,
amen.
Yeah. Well, Chris, if I could, maybe just tell us a little bit more about sort of the experience of kind of life there at the school, because I know that in some ways it is sort of a typical Chesterton Academy, but in other ways, I know that you have some distinctives. You have your, I think they're called Forsati days, sort of when you go out and
I know what you're asking. So, all right. So the kind of official, formal Chesterton curriculum, which we all embrace, has obviously math, science, history, literature, theology, philosophy. What am I forgetting? But it's a beautiful integrated classical great books curriculum. And by integrated, we mean that there's always attention to what's happening across the subjects. So you're reading Plato in philosophy while you're reading Homer in literature while you're reading Euclid and math, so that the student experience is to be of an integrated experience of truth. There's a unity across all the disciplines. That's really important. If I could tell just a brief anecdote about why I love the Chesterton curriculum, because another galvanizing moment in giving me the courage to get involved in starting the school came when, as a parish deacon, I was having coffee with a parishioner. He was a dad, and his son was the valedictorian of a archdiocesan legacy Catholic high school, super bright kid. And if I could just condense some conversations, that really bright student had gone to his biology teacher and said, "Sir, can a Catholic believe in evolution? How do religion and science go together?" And the biology teacher had shrugged his shoulders and said, "Sorry, kid, above my pay grade. I just teach science." And he'd gone to his theology teacher and asked the same question. And again, I'm condensing, long story, but he basically had the same conversation with his theology teacher and got a squishy non-answer answer. I wish the theology teacher had had the confidence to say, "I don't know, let's go look it up," but that's not what happened. And this young man graduated from a Catholic school thinking that the faith was stupid and didn't have answers to his totally legitimate, difficult questions. So the Chesterton curriculum is designed so that that kind of thing doesn't happen. So that, all the teachers are constantly in conversation, planning their, one truth witness to, the glory of our civilization. And, it's set up so that the biology teacher can say to the theology teacher, "Hey, we're doing Darwin in biology class this week. Get ready." And the theology teacher can say to the biology teacher, "Hey, doing Genesis this month. Get ready for some questions." But there's this real sense of respecting the teenagers' intellectual dignity and making sure that all the classes are talking to each other. So that's the meat of the sandwich, the main course, the academics, the classes. And you'll find that in every Chesterton Academy, because that's what we all sign up to do. Martin Saints does have a few distinctive things that we work in there. I have no idea how we find the hours in the day. That actually is a challenging conversation. But we have a couple things. First of all, we start the school year, we take the whole school on a camping trip. For 4 days, the whole school, we rent a summer camp in the Poconos that has just closed down for the season. And we have canoeing and swimming and rock climbing and all that stuff. Bonfires in the evening. So that's the camp. The camping trip starts the year, and it's an important part of Martin Saints culture because, on the one hand, the kids are just relaxing and making friends and before school starts. But on a deeper level, it is setting up a conversation that I hope is unfolding across the school year. We want to say, hey, when the bald eagle soared over the river as we were canoeing, and the sunlight was glittering on the water, and the wind moved through the trees, and we were all quiet for a few minutes, did you feel closer to God? Did you feel the Spirit moving? Maybe so. Because if you concede that point, well, now we can start talking about how God speaks through creation, and God works, the spiritual speaks through the material. So we're talking about the sacraments and how God speaks through water, wine, bread, oil. And once you're talking about the sacramental life and the Catholic sacramental imagination, you can also work in there. And, all of creation's like that. It's not just meaningless, inert matter. By the way, your bodies have a teleology too. You were made male and female for a reason. So, because I remember, you can say to the teenagers, remember that time in the woods when we unplugged and we had no devices and we were able to kind of tune in and pray. Because I feel like a lot of the pastoral issues with teenagers today, they surround the body, sexuality, and technology. So by starting the school year with a camping trip, it's a real intentional effort to establish a school culture where we can talk about those issues. And we try and keep it going during the whole school year. Every Friday at Martin Saints is special in some way. Joe alluded to this program we have called Frassati Fridays. And Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, another one of our kind of patron saints, will be canonized, I think, later this year. He lived about a little over 100 years ago. He was from Milan in northern Italy. If you ever see his prayer card, He's always pictured on top of a mountain smoking a pipe. Very Chestertonian. A great lover of the outdoors, very athletic, maybe not so Chestertonian. But he, besides a lover of the outdoors, there's that. But his affection for the outdoors brings in that John Paul II element of evangelizing and doing pastoral work from the canoe, in the forest, on the mountaintop. But the other thing Frassati had going for him was his mom was a painter, and his father was the founder of La Stampa, prestigious newspaper. So that the family was very oriented towards high culture, patrons of culture, and he himself was a great lover of the poor. He was president of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and there's legends, stories about thousands of the poor shocking his family when they turned out for his funeral, because he just had all these friends among the poor. And so Frassati is an outdoorsman, enjoyer of high culture, lover of the poor. So we have these things, Frassati Fridays, where once a month we go on some kind of intentional field trip, and it's always either an outdoor adventure, so the camping and canoe trip, a hike, a visit to a farm, or it's some kind of experience of high culture, the ballet matinee, the orchestra dress rehearsal, the art museum, or it's some kind of corporal work of mercy, working in the soup kitchen, visiting the old folks' home. So, the Frassati Fridays, he's our patron for these trips, which again, it's meant to push back against the criticism of classical schooling. Bishop Barron has this line: you can't evangelize the world unless you love it, right? You can't be a hostile, skeptical, curled lip churl. And so Frassati Fridays is all about, getting outside of school, falling in love with the world, adventure, culture, corporal works of mercies. Now that's only once a month. The other Fridays that we're in school, we have what we call we have a craftsmanship program where everybody rotates between a bit of woodworking, metalworking, cooking, fiber arts. This last year or two, we've had an architecture elective. And so it's just a little extra thing that we do on Fridays. Again, there's a calculated pastoral evangelical strategy behind it, because you're rebelling against being passive iPhone zombies. You're doing something productive. And there's a shopcraft, a soulcraft, Matthew Crawford aspect to getting out of your head, working with your hands, learning a trade. So Fridays are special at Martin Saints, where we squeeze in something a little special. Yeah.
No, I love that. I think that's spectacular. Both of those aspects. The adventure culture, the poor, so wonderful, so beautiful. And then
it makes you want to enroll, doesn't it? I mean, I want to get in a time machine.
There's one other thing that we do on Fridays too. Sometimes there's a thing in the mailbox. There's a mailbox. There's a thing in the hallway. We call it the Theology QA Box. And it's a box, and there's a little table beside the box with little Post-it notes and pens. And the idea there, it's an invitation for any student to put in a question anytime, anonymously, about anything. And once a month on a Friday, we get 3 or 4 teachers. We sit in front of all the students, and we answer whatever's in the box. And obviously, in class, you're trying to cultivate a conversational atmosphere, and the kids can wrestle with things intellectually. But the box is to say, if you have a question that doesn't fit anywhere, or you have a question you're a little bit shy, you can put it in there. And so, again, to push back against some of the critiques of classical education, they want to, the critics want to say, oh, well, it's a kind of claustrophobic, brittle piety, and, you're just teaching them to regurgitate orthodox answers. And this is like, no, we've got this Theology Q&A box where the kids know where we, the teachers, stand, but we say to them that, the truth is never afraid. We are ready to talk about anything. And so they take you up on that. And they put questions in there about anything. So this Friday we've got one coming up, and there's some classic chestnuts in there. I think somebody wants to know, how can Catholics possibly justify filioque? And then there's other questions where they tease me. Hey, Deacon, did Noah have a pair of termites on the ark? Think about it. And then there's some personal ones where you need to knit together perspective from a few different aspects of life. Like, hey, my friend on social media wants me to use different pronouns. What should I say? So you get all kinds of questions. But the Theology Q&A box is to establish a school culture of, faith-seeking understanding, fearless, magnanimous conversation.
And that's beautiful because, I don't know, as a grown-up, I get shy about certain questions, but it was definitely 100 times worse when I was a teenager. So it's just a brilliant way to get that sort of open door without having to sort of force. There's some teaching methods out there today that I do not approve of, the sort of force sharing in a public way, and I think that's a nice alternative that allows them to retain privacy and
if they want to share and speak personally, they can do it in all kinds of small group settings in class. But yeah, this is just kind of a safety valve.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're approaching kind of the end of our time here, Chris, but I would be remiss not to say, we're privileged in a certain way. We have that privileged vantage point, as you talked about with you and Adam at the beginning of your story there, of being able to see the culture. But I think that people tuning into this podcast, viewers, listeners, are also, they're aware of the cultural challenges that we face, and also probably feeling that desire to live a joyful witness to the gospel. But maybe they don't have the ability to start a school, start a local Chesterton Society, do anything. But what advice would you just give generally? How has being a part of this movement, being a part of this work, kind of just changed your day-to-day in ways that maybe surprised you, that maybe anybody, regardless of their state or situation in life, could adapt into their own practice?
Gosh,
not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, great. Always be ready to give an account for the hope that is in you, right?
Amen. Yeah.
So there's this great scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, the first book of the Lord of the Rings that I'm sure you're familiar with, where Gandalf the Wizard is briefing Frodo the Hobbit on this quest that lies ahead of them, this terrible dark ring and all the dangers that are ahead of them. And Frodo is like, oh man, I wish I wasn't born in these times. I wish that I was born some other time. But Gandalf's like, yeah, well, none of us get to choose when we're born. We only get to choose what we're going to do with the time that we have. And that's kind of how I feel, is that, there's that Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And, some days I'm weary of living in interesting times. I wish we lived in boring, settled times. But, God has called us to be his people in this time and place. And so at Martin Saints, we pray frequent thanks to God for asking for the honor and privilege of being his people in this time and place. And we, when you pray the Liturgy of the Hours and you pray the Psalms and you see, the kind of history of Israel and the fidelity of the remnant in times of exile and, times of national apostasy, it's, what we're being asked to do today, to be faithful and joyful in a challenging time when we don't live in an easy, homogeneous, harmonious Christian culture. What we're being asked to do to be faithful in these circumstances, it's not novel. You pick up the Psalms and that God has asked us. So I guess day to day, I pray the Psalms. I pray Liturgy of the Hours, morning and evening prayer. And I remind myself that being part of a remnant is part of our faith. It's part of our history. And, maybe the memory of a generation or two where you could just kind of, assume a cultural background where you got your faith by osmosis. Maybe that's the exception, not the norm. And so let's not be nostalgic and let's do our best with where we're planted.
Beautiful answer for the refutation of the classical critics. Excellent.
Yes,
I think you answered all the things that you said that they have brought up. So wonderful.
Well, thank you. I've
indeed.
really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity to share the story because, classical education, it's so much fun. I do give thanks. I give thanks that in these challenging times, we all have the privilege of working in these schools with this Chestertonian spirituality. So maybe a final piece of advice, somebody looking for how to live day to day, visit, in my case, our website is ymsc.org, whymsc.org. Visit the school website. We have plenty of public events. And of course, we could use supporters and partners. So come get involved in the school. That's a piece of advice. We'd love to meet you.
Love it.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, we will put that link in the show notes. We'll have links to the Chesterton Schools Network website where you can learn just about the network and the work that we're doing there. As always, of course, the Chesterton Society, just like all of our schools, depends on support. So please consider doing that. You'll find links in the description down there about that. And just Chris, once again, thank you so much and good luck with the rest of the school year.
Thank you so much, Joe. Grettelyn, it's been great to be with you.
Grettelyn, thank you as always.
Thank you. Wonderful time.
And to you, our viewers and listeners, thank you. We couldn't keep this going without you. Please do share this podcast with your friends. Like, subscribe, hit that button, the bell thing so they get the notifications. Do all the things that tells YouTube that this is interesting stuff that it needs to show to other people who are spending too much time watching Joe Rogan. And we'll get some of that audience over here because, as we know, Chesterton is always better with more and more friends. Till next time, God bless.